1536, Don Pedro de Mendoza attempted to lay the first stones of Buenos Aires, only to see his dream unravel as the settlement was ravaged by fierce indigenous attacks and a crippling shortage of supplies, setting the stage for one of the city's most dramatic beginnings. When the era of exploration is discussed, the area called the Southern Cone, which is the most southern part of South America, is often forgotten. This area is home to the Guarani and the indigenous people of the Pampas. This region was scouted not only for its riches, but also to find another passage to the Peruvian silver mines. This was the main reason for Sebastian Cabot's voyages to the Chaco territory, where the Venetian explorer found the Rio de la Plata. He named this watercourse River of Silver, as he believed that, by navigating it, he could reach the silver mines of Peru. With his discoveries in 1530, Cabot returned to Spain and shared his findings with the Spanish crown, which decided to finance an expedition to the region. This expedition was led by Don Pedro de Mendoza, a Spanish general from Granada, who proved his valor and bravery in the Italian wars against the French. During his journey, Don Pedro became wary of his second-in-command, Juan de Osorio, who was adored by his crew. He made some negative remarks about him to Juan de Ayolas, the chief constable, who seems to have mistaken what he said to be an order for instant execution. This was to be carried out with his dagger, a scene described as cosiéndole a puñaladas, which is a Spanish expression that brutally describes the scene and in English means sewing him up with cuts. The troops believed that this execution was ordered by Don Pedro, as he probably was worried about the possibility of an uprising, which was not unheard of in these kinds of voyages. Therefore, the general became very unpopular among his soldiers. In 1535, the expedition arrived at the Rio de la Plata and were welcomed by the pamperos, which are very strong bursts of polar winds from the southeast and blows through the Pampa region. As soon as the winds slowed down, the Spaniards stopped at the margin of the river. On arrival, it was exclaimed, "Que buenos aires son estos," which translates to, "What good airs these are," hence the name Buenos Aires. However, it was not the most convenient place to found a settlement. It was almost level with the river's water and situated in such a shallow spot that the vessels could not approach nearer than 10 to 15 miles. After building a settlement, the Spaniards were met by the Pampas Indians, who were friendly at first and brought provisions for a couple of days. The general was upset that the Indians refused to bring him more supplies, as the encomienda system implemented by the Spanish crown in 1503 allows colonists to require supplies and labor from the natives in exchange for supposed protection and religious instruction. As a result, Don Pedro sent an expedition led by his brother, Don Diego de Mendoza, to gather more supplies from the native people, which slain him and a few of his companions. These indigenous had an ingenious weapon called bolas, made by 3 stones united by a string, which they used to catch the horses by entangling their legs and make them fall. After the failure of his brother's expedition, the indigenous people besieged Don Pedro's settlement, making it impossible for the Spaniards to get more provisions. The situation was so desperate that the soldiers started to steal horses to feed themselves. The thieves were caught and hung for their crimes, but during the night, their body parts were stolen from the gallows and probably eaten by other soldiers. In desperation, Don Pedro sent Juan de Ayolas on an expedition to find more provisions, which he did with the Timbu tribe, who gave them maize, and not only supplies, but he also found a little fort previously built by Cabot, called Corpus Christi. After leaving a few of his troops at the fort, Juan de Ayolas went back to rescue Don Pedro, who abandoned Buenos Aires with roughly 500 men. This was all that was left from the 2,600 soldiers that left Spain. When retreating from Buenos Aires, the Spaniards left their horses behind, which are the ancestors of the herds of horses that, to this day, populate Argentina. From Corpus Christi, Juan de Ayolas was sent to explore the river and find a passage to the Peruvian mines, which he never reached, and Corpus Christi never saw him return. After waiting for a year, Don Pedro de Mendoza decided to go back to Spain, leaving a few men in the fort. He died of syphilis on the journey back and never was able to see his motherland again, which many believed was a divine punishment on him for the murder of Don Juan de Osorio. The first conquest expedition by the Spaniards to the Southern Cone, led by Don Pedro de Mendoza, was not successful in itself, but opened the door to many other future expeditions. This helped the Spanish crown to understand the land better and its people. The small and unlucky settlement founded at the shores of the Rio de la Plata will have a revival and become the metropolis that it is today. Subscribe Subscribe and embark on animated journeys through the Age of Discovery, where brave explorers, lost worlds, and untold stories await.